What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. And I could not be more excited to completely nerd out about the salary cap for the next however long it's going to take with my good friend, Ken Ingalls. You can follow him on Twitter at Ken Ingalls, appropriately enough. Ken, thank you so much for joining me. I've been meaning to do this for a while. I'm super excited to get to connect with you because this is obviously a crazy, crazy offseason that we're about to experience. And what better person to have on than you to talk about all the salary cap minutia and nerd out about all things Packers salary cap.
Hey, Andy, thanks a lot. Totally excited to nerd out with you as well. Yeah, this offseason is going to be crazy, man. You know, we got the Super Bowl upcoming here quickly, and then I think things are going to ramp up pretty hot and heavy, pretty soon after. If I remember what we did last year, what the Packers did last year, right around this time, right around the 13th, 14th, 15th is when we started seeing the first dominoes start to fall. So great time to, kick off this conversation, see where they're going to go.
Yeah, my hope and what I believe is I think this is really going to be a tremendous resource for anyone that kind of wants to know what's upcoming. And you really picked the perfect time to get into what you're doing, because let's just be real. If you did this, I don't know, a decade ago with Ted Thompson, you would have maybe spent about 5 minutes on every podcast being like, they'll resign some of their own guys. They're going to draft a couple players. I'll see you next year.
Right. I had a question came my way just the other night where someone's like, who would be the biggest surprise if the Packers would let someone go, like a Josh Sitton from a few years back, right? Like that came out of nowhere, and I really got stumbled by that because I'm like, every single veteran player on this team is a potential candidate where I could see a scenario where they won't necessarily be here, right? With few exceptions. They're going to have their contract touched in some way, or they're at risk of being cut. Where, to your point, a decade ago, no, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be talking about who they're not going to sign in free agency.
Yes, exactly. But these are new times. Brian Gutekunst has brought in a new philosophy, along with Russ Ball really executing that from a cap standpoint. And that's why these conversations are so incredibly important to have. I think probably the most appropriate place to start is where Green Bay is at right now. And again, probably no better person in the world to break that down than you. So where is Green Bay right now? And then we'll kind of break things down from there.
Okay. So everything considered, like from, everything with like where the salary cap is going to be $208.2 million as a starting point. That's the maximum that the cap can be this year. Everyone expects that it's going to be that at that cap of the cap, if you will, because if you remember, there is still some payback from these COVID losses that have to happen. So they negotiated that it can't go higher than that. And then there's just under $3 million that the Packers carried over. All that considered, where they're at right now, they just signed their 51st player on the active roster. And as we all know, in the offseason, only the top 51 contracts count against the salary cap. Yep. So right now we have a good baseline of where they're going to be. When new guys come on or other guys fall off, that 51 is that leveling point. Right now, I have them at $52.9 million over the cap if they do nothing. Obviously, they're not going to do nothing. But then that's just where they're at now. We're going to get into, I'm sure, some of the minutia later, but they've got exclusive rights free agents that they probably want to bring back. They've got restricted free agent in Lazard, who's probably on their radar to come back. Those I put in the very likely to come back scenario. So if you just add those guys on, that puts them at $76 million over the cap when they need at the March 16th deadline, which is the deadline where they need to be under the cap, right? That's when the new league year starts. Then you add in the draft, that thing that happens in April that we all love. That'll add another $2.6 million. Then all the other costs that it takes to run a football team, the practice squad. People forget that the practice squad, those salaries count, and those are getting more and more expensive. That's going to be at least $3.5 million, plus all the elevations that we now see where these guys, the Packers, it seems week in and week out are elevating at least one, sometimes two or three now with COVID rules. That costs extra money. All in, if you take like where they are now, if they do nothing and just add kind of the minimum guys who are probably going to be back and the draft and just getting ready for the regular season and having a bare minimum of $5 million in like your back pocket as a piggy bank, that puts them at $89.5 million over all in. So yeah, you can go online, you can look at sites and you'll see, okay, 50 million, 48 million, whatever. But considering all the things in play here, there's a lot more that goes on top of, where they look at any given point in time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing a snapshot right now. As you mentioned, eventually it also moves to the 53-man roster. So they have to have 2 more contracts on at some point, the practice squad. And as you were sort of getting into as well, people forget that, when you put somebody on injured reserve, their salary stays on the salary cap. And then anyone that you need to add to the roster or that is called up from the practice squad to the active roster, now you have a new salary on there. Plus then if you take somebody and put them on the practice squad, they got it. Like it all adds up over time, which I think you always do a good job of explaining and sort of saying like, there needs to be this 5 to 10 million slush fund that you have because crap will happen throughout the season. And you can't just go with, 50 guys on your roster for an extended period of time. You need those spots and you need to have guys, to play special teams, which we know is kind of important.
Right. We saw that exactly this past season, right? With at one point they had like 15 guys on injured reserve. It was crazy, and big names too. David Bakhtiari, Zadarius Smith. These are your number 2 and 3 contracts on the team, and they're sitting there on injured reserve, and you don't get a discount for those top tier veterans. Some of the entry level players or younger guys, you get a little bit of a discount. All things considered, they were getting really tight because this past season they squeezed as much out of the cap as they possibly could. There was getting to a point where they were getting down. If they had many more injuries, if they only rolled over less than $3 million after doing everything they did, they got to a point where if things got dire, there weren't a lot of extra options for them. So they were all in terms of, where they were with what they could maneuver.
Yeah, they cut it very close. And I know we could have a whole nother episode on whether or not that was an all-in season. You and I are very much on the same page. That was about as all-in as you can get. They squeezed every drop out of that orange as they could possibly get out of it. That's another story for another day. But I think you've had a really good philosophy, and I'll let you say it, but this offseason of what Green Bay can and can't do. You've said it, I know, on a lot of the radio hits you've done, as well as pretty much on Twitter throughout the offseason. But Green Bay can, I'll just let you say it. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I've been saying look, the Packers can bring back whoever they want. You want them to have Aaron Rodgers come back. You want them to have Devontae come back. Any of the other free agents, the 23 free agents on this team, pick one, pick a few. They can bring them back, but they can't bring them all back, right? It's about choices. There are no absolutes. I'm not going to sit here and talk to you. They can't bring back Davante Adams, or there's no way that Aaron Rodgers comes back, or Rasul Douglas is absolutely walking. No, they can make anything work with any of those guys. There's a lot of different levers that the Packers can pull to get there. Russ Ball didn't just wake up, the Sunday morning after the playoff loss and fire up Excel for the first time and be like, hey, where are we at with the cap, right? This is his job. He's been doing this for all year in much more detail than I'll ever be able to do. And he knows exactly what they can do. They've got plans for every scenario. And it's a matter of, where they want to land on that spectrum, how much they really need to balance, getting a competitive team for this season and, not necessarily mortgaging the future to the extent that to be able to pull that off. Right. So it's a very delicate balance. I'll be very interested to see where they land.
Now, I think there's a chance that maybe not a chance. Obviously, if they don't know what the situation with Aaron Rodgers is quite yet, that leaves things a little bit more open-ended as to where, what direction that maybe they're going to go in. But I think it's more than fair to say, and you can disagree with me on this if you want, but Green Bay probably has a pretty strong idea of exactly how they're going to execute this already in some capacity, at least from a restructures, releasing, who's going to be gone, who they want to prioritize. They might not be able to know to a T right now of what exact dollar value they can get Devontae or Douglas or Campbell, but they have this laid out and a whole plan set for probably 2 paths, right? 1, if Rodgers is back, and 2, if they have to quickly pivot in another direction via retirement or he demands a trade of some capacity. But I have to believe that they have a really good feel for a couple of those different directions. And now it's just sort of peeling back the layer one by one of, all right, is Rodgers back? What's Davante's salary? And then sort of figuring out and slotting in exactly how much they can kind of go from there.
Absolutely. It becomes a puzzle with like morphable puzzle pieces, right?
Right.
And, Rodgers is obviously the biggest piece of that puzzle. I would argue Davante Adams is probably the second largest puzzle piece to that. I think you nailed it there, right? Like they have an idea. They don't know exactly where things are going to land, but they have a plan. I think what speaks to that, if you look at the Zadarius Smith scenario from last season, trying to get under the cap, he was the last contract that they negotiated right up to the deadline. And I think what we saw is that the Packers wanted to add on void years and Zadarius wanted an extension. Yep. And they kind of, Russ Ball got him down to the like last possible second. And it's like, okay, this isn't going to work. And so they did the simple restructure, not the full on all in void year max restructure. And that just slid them underneath the cap right before the deadline. And I'm sure they've got those type of scenarios like, okay, if we could pull off this option, this gives us this. If they, if option ABC for like every single player on the roster, I'm sure right now, they have a plan for that and exactly how they can manipulate that to get that 53 million down to zero.
We're going to go with position by position in just a moment. Of course, we'll start with Aaron Rodgers, and I'm sure that's where a lot of people want to get to. But I think it's really important before we get there to address a specific fact that, again, I think you and I are very much on the same page here with. There's this idea that there's always money in the banana stand, that you can consistently borrow from the cap forever and ever, that the salary cap is fake, and that, it's just a construct that you can always sign whoever you want. And I'll let you obviously speak for yourself. I'll just say, I don't believe that. I believe it's a credit card bill that always comes due at some point down the road. It's funny. You tweeted out something that I had said on here, I think almost the exact same day, in the fact that, yeah, even if all of a sudden the salary cap catches up and explodes, like even if that happens and now they have the money to cover everything and they don't have to borrow a bunch from future salary caps, well, there's going to be maybe half the league or more, maybe if it's even 5 or 6 teams that didn't have to do that. And now they have a $50 million head start on you. And then you might be able to say, well, then they can borrow from the future again. Well, so can that team that has still $50 million more than you. So you're still operating at a loss in comparison to other teams who haven't borrowed this. You how I equate it. And again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here. How I equate it is Green Bay, especially like kind of starting with the Smiths and Amos and Billy Turner and even kind of the last couple of years, they got to really operate at a cap surplus because they started borrowing from the future, started basically signing contracts that were low tier to begin with, but that were going to kick in higher in the future. They got to have a lot of fun and sign a lot of players up front and have sort of their cake then. But then later, they're going to be at a point of having to sort of catch back up, where 5 to 10 other teams are now going to be at the point where they can sign their Smith brothers, their Amos, their Billy Turner, and have some young free agents. So it's going to, in my opinion, the NFL is going to start becoming very cyclical. If you're going to see these teams go in waves where it's sort of all in, we're going to catch back up, all in, catch back up. We're seeing the Saints in that catch back up sort of phase where they can't do a ton because they have to sort of just, restructure everything and get things under the cap. So correct me if anything I said is wrong, but that's sort of my view of it right now.
No, I fully agree. We're totally on the same page. Like, I think of it like running a 100-meter race, right? And if everyone starts, they run the 100-meter race, but if you, borrow from someone from the future, you basically have to run 150 meters faster than other teams are running the 100 meters, right? You're putting yourself at that much more of a disadvantage. And we're seeing it this year. Like the cap going up doesn't solve all problems, right? Last year, the cap went down, $16 million. And at this time last year, they were about $29 million over the cap. This year, the cap is going up 26. So instead of down 16, it's going up 26. And they're $53 million over. Like the cap, by all accounts, is exploding this year, and they're in a much worse financial shape because of the choices that they had to make and that they chose to make beyond what they had to for that all-in type of season. And now we're kind of seeing kind of the consequences of this. As Packer fans, you kind of hit it earlier, where for years, the mantra was, let's just get into the playoffs, do what we can. We're not going to overextend ourselves, slow and steady, and give ourselves a shot in the playoffs. This year, the Packers did what a lot of fans had been hoping for years, right? Let's go all in. Let's do that one shot, and now we'll deal with the aftermath later. And unfortunately, this is the aftermath, and there's going to be some tough decisions that Russ Ball and Brian Gutekunst are going to have to make.
Yeah, this is where GMs and salary cap gurus make their money, right? It's easy to do the stuff in a lot of ways that they've done the last few years. Now is where you sort of earn your paycheck and say, all right, we don't have the money to go and find people and spend on free agents and things like that. Now we got to find, again, those Devondre Campbells, the Rasul Douglases, and, have another draft with an Eric Stokes and find a Josh Myers and have guys who can come in and assist you from day one. So this is where they're going to make their money for sure. Let's get to the coup de grace here. Let's kind of go position by position. We'll focus mostly here on some of the key players because there's a lot of stuff to go around. We'll try to hit it as quickly as we can, but let's start with quarterback. And of course, everyone wants to know about Aaron Rodgers. I think you and I are going to be in lockstep again in the fact that there's probably next to zero chance that he plays on his current contract the way that it is right now. So what are some options here with Aaron?
Right. For me, it really comes down to two. I know there's technically more. Yeah, he could retire. I don't see that happening. Agreed. He could come back on a 1-year kind of soft deal and then kind of be able to leave or walk away and, hand things over to a Jordan Love type of. I don't see that happening. What I really see happening, it's either long-term deal for Aaron Rodgers or he's traded, right? Either the Packers commit to him, for basically the rest of his career or signing a contract well into his, past his 40th birthday, or they say it's time to move on. And, or I guess another scenario is a pay cut, but I don't see that. I don't really see that happening. And even if he took the minimum, if Aaron Rodgers took the minimum salary, which is just over $1 million, $1.1 million for a guy who's been in the league for as long as he has, his cap would still be over $20 million from all these backloadings, right? So it doesn't solve all problems there either. What gets tough with the timing is if the Packers do choose to move on and execute a trade, that contract sits on the Packers books at that $46 million past that deadline to where they need to be under the cap, right? So they can't, in years past, like the most recent example, like the Goff and the Stafford trade, right? We all heard about that in February. It was all over ESPN, it was all over Twitter or whatever. They couldn't execute that trade until after free agency started, after the new league year starts, when you need to be under the cap. So that's what would happen with an Aaron Rodgers contract. So that makes things even more difficult, on their path. If they choose to execute a trade, they need to kind of sit on that humongous cap number and maneuver other contracts around to be able to make that work. If they were to sign him to a long-term deal, even if they made him, the highest paid player in the league, right, over north of $45 million, passing Patrick Mahomes, they could still shave $10 to $15 million off of his cap number. Yeah, it'd still be in the 30s, but it would provide relief immediately and allow for more options on other spots of the roster to get under that cap number.
Are there ways to redo his deal prior, like while that trade is in process, and then have him sign a new deal when he goes to the new team?
There probably are. There probably really are. I know that there are limits as to how frequently you can sign a contract that increases your average pay. And then I think there are limits and consequences to like shortening or shrinking a contract and then expanding it. They don't want those type of like accordion type things to be able to happen to like, oh, we're just going to temporarily decrease your contract right to the deadline. And then when we have more flexibility, then inflate it out. Right. There are some nuances with that can get real, convoluted, and we haven't really seen much. I think the closest thing that we've kind of seen in recent years was like with retirements. A lot of times we're going to see with the Drew Brees retirement, we're going to see, or we saw Drew Brees retirement, we saw with Tom Brady. They're going to hold on to those retirements until after the June 1st date to kind of spread things out. But I don't think that there's much that they can really do unless, Russ Ball digs into his really deep bag of tricks on that one.
All right, let's move over to is there, do you think there's anything else we need to touch base on Rodgers there? I think it's fairly straightforward. Like you said, it's going to be some sort of probably large extension, kicking money towards future years, or it's going to be a trade of some sort. I think those are the
Right.
two realistic
Right.
options.
Either Aaron Rodgers is going to be your starting quarterback for 2022 and beyond, or fill in the blank.
Yes, exactly. Good call. All right, let's move to running back, which I think it might be the easiest position to talk about this entire offseason. I think it's probably going to be the position that doesn't change much. Jones, Dillon, Taylor, Kylan Hill at some point when he comes back from injury are probably your key players there. There is some uniqueness with Aaron Jones's contract. Do you think there's any opportunity for a restructure there?
Oh, I think they're absolutely going to restructure him. I think it's ripe. He's got I forget how much it is. He has a signing bonus or sorry, a roster bonus that's due like the third day of the league year. So like the 19th or the 20th. And instead of having that sit, they'll probably restructure his full contract. I think if they do a full restructure on Aaron Jones, I've got that penciled in at just over $3 million of savings. And I think they'll absolutely do that as part of their kind of baseline plan. They might only do like the roster bonus. They might not do the base salary, but they can get up to $3 million if they pull that trigger. And I think it's a safe one. And it still allows them flexibility, because I know everyone's talked about past 2022. That's the question mark of, could they potentially move on? It would still allow them that option to get out, relatively unscathed from a cap perspective past this year.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense as well. Let's move to wide receiver. Of course, the elephant in the room is Davante Adams, but there's a lot more here, right? MVS is a free agent. EQ is a free agent. Randall Cobb, there's no chance in heck he's playing at $9.6 million. Alan Lazard's a restricted free agent. Malik Taylor's an exclusive rights free agent. But they do have Juwan Winfrey and Amari Rodgers, under contract. So that's where you want to start off, right? But this is a really interesting position, and I don't even know where you want to start on this one. I'll let you take the reins.
Oh man, I've been talking about wide receiver for about 2 years.
Yep.
At saying like this offseason is going to be a disaster, and they've done like next to nothing to like alleviate or extend or figure out long-term solutions at the position. And now we're staring at this humongous mess, right? Randall Cobb's the veteran in the room, and he's probably going to get cut. Best case scenario, he takes a massive pay cut.
Yeah.
The Rodgers relationship complicates that, because I think it's no mystery that Cobb is here because of Rodgers wanting him to be here and him being his best buddy and friend, and really advocating for him to return to the Green Bay. So that can get a little muddy. That's one of those things that they've got probably have several different options planned out with what to do with Cobb and how that balances with Rodgers. The next guy of seniority is Juwan Winfrey with the most experience, which is crazy. Amari Rodgers has more questions than answers, both on special teams and in the offense.
Yeah,
they got to get something done. Like you mentioned all those names. I know the popular take right now is that the Packers will just franchise Adams, right? And either franchise to keep him or franchise to trade him. The way things out, as I run the math and I look at like the realistic, levers that they could pull, that gets real tough, because again, it's the order of operations and the timing, right? That March 16th deadline, if they were to throw a franchise tag on Davante, that adds $20.12 million on top of their existing almost $53 million over the cap. And they can't restructure that. They can't finagle. They can't do anything to that number. And so they would have to sit on that and be under the cap as we pass the threshold of the new league year, and then be able to execute a trade or, hold on to that to be able to negotiate a long-term deal. I think Davante's best chance to return to this team has always been a long-term deal negotiated outside of the franchise tag. And even if you do tag him, like he could be like, you know what? Good luck with that. I'll see you in 9 weeks. You won't hear from me or my agent. And then what? Now you got this humongous anchor on your cap. So I would love to see him back. But the franchise tag for me, as we get closer, it'll be interesting to see how many levers they pull and how close they are to getting to over that cap number. But if they're nowhere close to $20 million at that, March 8th deadline, I don't think we'll see it.
I'm going to break order of operations here just for a second, because I think it's worth discussing the fact that one of the things to me that is the most intriguing is I believe Aaron Rodgers is going to want, of course, some assurance from the Packers that they're going to go all in. And he may want to be in the conversation and say, listen, some of the guys I want back are like his best friends on the team, Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb, Mercedes Lewis, Billy Turner. Like, these are guys that if they want to fit Adams and Rodgers into the cap, like Cobb, Mercedes, Billy Turner, like some of those guys are the guys that are probably going to have to suffer to sort of make that happen, which we'll get into more in just a moment. But that just like the layers of complexity of how Green Bay, in my opinion, is going to have to tiptoe around the Rodgers situation, because they don't just have a blank checkbook to say, yeah, anyone that you want back with Lewis and Turner and like all these guys, like, yeah, we can get all those guys back. Like you said, they maybe can, but it's probably not best for business at that point either. So like, man, it's just such a really complicated issue, because the guys that could be on the outs in order to get Rodgers and maybe Devontae back are like the guys that Rodgers really wants back. And I think Randall Cobb in this situation, as we talk about wide receivers, is a great example of that. Like you said, maybe they do a massive restructure and maybe Cobb says, listen, I just want one more year with Aaron. I'm willing to take the vet minimum, and that solves itself. But it's still complicated nonetheless.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be crazy. And that dynamic of how do we negotiate, who do we keep on the roster to make our future Hall of Fame quarterback, likely 4-time MVP quarterback, happy, versus what's best for the long and short-term health of the Green Bay Packers and the roster. Man, that dance is going to be something. And like, it's a month. It's crazy. Like, it snuck up on me, but like March 16th is not that far away. No. And there's going to be some rapid fire movements and a lot of updates coming up. It'll be fun to follow.
The next month and a half, there will be no lack of content in Green Bay. There will be something new to discuss, I think, almost all the time. It's going to be a whirlwind and it's going to be nuts. And I mean, frankly, I can't wait, because it's going to be something new. It feels like probably every single day. And I think the news is going to start breaking rapidly as this all goes on. Players are going to be coming and going and re-signing and restructuring. And it's going to be crazy. Let's move to tight end, because again, very similar situation here. Robert Tonyan, unrestricted free agent. Mercedes Lewis has a cap hit that I'm not sure that they're going to want to necessarily pay him. And then you've got DeGuara Davis on the roster, with Dominique Daphne being an exclusive rights guy. I don't know. Lewis is probably the interesting one to talk about, but Tonyan certainly has some noteworthy stuff too.
Right. Yeah, the Packers are back at it with tight end. And, as soon as we think we've got it kind of figured out, some stability, and here we are again, trying to figure out what they're going to do. I look at a guy like Lewis, he's also kind of in my baseline roadmap, a guy that is probably looking at being cut or takes a retirement. There's not a lot of savings to be had with a price cut or anything. But then, where does that leave the room, to your point? Tonyan, he was a restricted free agent this year. I think that they let him hit free agency and see what's out there, and maybe he's able to come back. That injury is probably going to scare a few teams away, and maybe he's comfortable, maybe he comes back at like on a prove it type of scenario.
Yep.
But, we're going to hear this a lot as we go on to some of these positions, right? Because, the ones that we talked about, with like running back, where, okay, it's pretty stable. But as we continue down the roster, like you're going to hear the same thing. Like, yeah, I'm sure they'd love to bring them back, but they've got to make their choices, right? So do they choose to go after a guy like Tonyan, or do they want to try and pursue, jumping ahead of myself, like a Devontae Campbell or Rasul Douglas? And, what choices can they make along the way? Where do they think that they can find value in the draft? Do they have someone on the practice squad that they really like, that's, maybe they're on a futures deal right now that they're hoping to stick around? But, tight end looks like it's totally in flux. You hope I'm sure they're really hoping that DeGuara could take that next level leap, going into year 3. I imagine that's weighing heavily into their decision-making right now.
No, I think so too. And I think the other thing that's worth pointing out here is it just takes one team to fall in love with one of these guys, whether it be Tonyan or Devondre Campbell, Rasul Douglas, et cetera. It's these unrestricted free agents. to be able to make him an offer, especially if there's a team with significant cap room and can, like, I know it's not like a match situation, but can like front load a contract where Green Bay, even if the player would come back and say like, hey, here's what XYZ team offered me. Do you guys want to, are you interested in doing the same thing? Green Bay is going to be like, we can't do that with the situation that we're currently in. So it just takes one team to fall in love. And oh, by the way, Denver has a coach that might be interested in some of these players. Steelers could have a new general manager that they potentially from Green Bay that could be interested in some of these players. So that could all very much complicate things. Luke Getsy, maybe in Chicago, gets in some people's ears and says, hey, I love Robert Tonyan. He's only going to be 27 this year. Maybe we won't have him the entirety of this year, but sign him to a 3 or 4 year deal. And we're going to get 3 really good years of him after this. Like all of those things could be in play too, that I know a lot of Packer fans don't want to hear, but that's what happens when you're tied up against the cap.
Right. And, we didn't see it a lot under McCarthy, but like we're seeing it now where Packers coaches and front office guys are being hired out and now dispersed among these other teams.
Yep.
Packers got, we had that Ravens connection for a while. That's why Zadarius Smith is on this team. And, he was, people are looking at that contract are like, why are you signing that? He was like the 3rd string outside linebacker and he's, all pro and has been like the leading pass rusher for the Packers for the past 2 years. And then, unfortunately had that injury. So we're going to start, our secret weapons for the Packers are now not going to be so secret with, our coaches leaving and, sharing those secrets with their new bosses and their new regimes. So it'll be interesting.
Unquestionably. All right, let's go through offensive line quickly. I think, Bakhtiari's restructure is probably the interesting one here. And then Billy Turner's decision, also an interesting one.
Right. Bakhtiari, he restructured last year. They're going to have to restructure him again, at least part, if not all of his roster bonus and maybe even all of his base salary that they can. If they go all out with a restructure, they can clear up almost $11 million, which would go a long way towards getting out of that hole. But at the same time, he's 9.3. I skipped the line talking about my boy Kenny Clark. A little bit of a preview there, but he's the other one that, like, for me, it's like it's a guaranteed lockstep that they're gonna restructure. But the problem with both those guys is that's a lot of cap savings. But what that does is it balloons these contracts, both Kenny Clark and a David Bakhtiari. If they go all in with these full-on void year max restructures, their salary cap hits start looking like franchise quarterbacks for guys who unfortunately aren't able to play at that franchise quarterback level of production, right? So, Billy Turner, he's in a camp with 2 other guys that I'll talk about where it's Turner and 2 other guys where I think those are going to be the last levers that are pulled potentially by Russ Ball to get them over where they want to go. Like, okay, we could get there without necessarily doing anything, but if we want to get an extra guy, or if we want to be able to bring back someone, or if we're looking outside, maybe we need to work on Turner's deal or cut him loose. Like, nothing would surprise me if they extend him, cut him, trade him, do nothing. I would be like, yeah, that makes sense. Like,
I think he is one of the more unpredictable ones. I'm leaning cut, but I don't have a strong gut on that either way. And I think restructure, even trade, like you said, that's not out of the realm of possibility either. He's going to be a really interesting one to keep an eye on. Of course, Dennis Kelly, Lucas Patrick, unrestricted, Jake Hansen, exclusive rights. And we might have some time to talk about Yash as well later, which is another interesting one. Let's move to defensive line. You talked a little bit about Kenny Clark there, but Dean Lowry, another player that's contract is very interesting.
Right. That's number 2 on my big 3, right? Like, he had a hell of a year. And again, they could cut him, extend him, trade him, pay cut, and all of those could make you can have a very good argument for any of those cases, right? And so, like, when it comes, and it's funny, like last year at this time, you would have asked me, what's Dean Lowry's status? I'd be like, oh, he's clearly gone, right? Or he's taking a massive pay cut. And he was one of the last guys that they even touched, and they ended up doing a restructure on him. And he kind of stepped up, and we'll see what they do there. But again, he's kind of in that like overflow bin, if you will, of like guys that decisions might come down to the wire, or if things don't go to plan, further up their timeline or their schedule, that they might have to turn to someone like like a Dean Lowry to squeeze a few pennies out of. But yeah, Kenny Clark is really interesting. So when he signed his extension, he pre-backloaded his deal. Like he only got like $2 million in cash all of last season, right?
Yep.
But because of that, his contract, like his cap number triples this year from 2021 to 2022. And that's creating a lot of problems and, big contributing factor to where they are now. And yeah, they can clear almost $11 million if they do a full restructure, which I fully expect them to do.
Yeah, that's another, I think probably, like you said, a low-hanging fruit one along with Bakhtiari, where there's just going to have to do it in order to get under it. At least with Clark, he's still young and hasn't had injuries.
Right.
Bakhtiari's injury clouds that as well of what they want to do there, but I just think they're going to have to do both of those. And I think Lowry ends up being restructured, but that's going to be a really interesting one as well. It might even, I don't even, like you said, it could go any direction and I wouldn't have a strong argument either way. Let's talk edge rusher. I think maybe the thing that would surprise me most of this entire offseason is if you told me Zadarius Smith was on the roster.
Right.
I think that to me seems like move 1A in like crossing off names for the Packers with what they need to do to start getting under the cap. To me, the easiest, most logical one is Zadarius Smith, but then they've got Preston to decide on. And I think those are, the big two to talk about there.
Right. Yeah. Zadarius Smith, unfortunately, I think, even before the season kicked off, it kind of seemed like we were inevitably kind of looking at his last year, wearing the green and gold. And unfortunately, the way things kind of went with his injury and not being able to get back on the field for a while. I think it's, to your point, it's one of the easiest lock to really put on. That would absolutely floor me if, we wake up after the Super Bowl, we see news that Zadarius Smith signs a 4-year extension with Green Bay. We're like, what? Sure, they could save cap in that way, but I just don't see them doing that. On the other side, I do see them extending Preston Smith.
I agree.
Yes, they could save a boatload of money if they were to cut him, but like, I don't know. Rashawn Gary's great, but you need more than one rusher, and everyone else on the roster behind him is unproven at best. They're rotational guys, and I'm sure they're looking for at least one of those guys to step up and to be a contributing factor. Like we all saw what Kyler Fackrell was able to do that one year with his sacks and his pressure numbers out of nowhere. Like they could really use that from some of these younger guys, these guys who have had, haven't had the opportunity. But I think we saw this whole season, unfortunately, due to Zadarius's injury, that Preston and Gary can get it done. I still think they need to draft and bring someone in to kind of fortify and solidify that edge rushing room. You can never have enough edge rushers, but yeah, I think there's a lot of savings to be had on their way to get out of this cap hole that they're in at the outside linebacker edge rusher position through Zadarius being cut and being able to extend Preston and probably saving a good $5, $6, $7 million in the process.
Yeah, I think so too. Those seem to be the two most obvious. And I agree with you. I thought there was at one point a time where Preston would not see another contract, but based on how he played and based on, again, you needing somebody opposite Gary, especially if you are going all in again, I just don't see how you can do anything besides extend Preston in that scenario. So again, nothing would shock me there, but I think those two are pretty logical choices for them to make. Let's move to inside linebacker, Devondre Campbell, unrestricted free agent, of course. Chris Barnes is in exclusive rights. That should be an easy negotiation, I would think. Oren Burke's unrestricted, but Devondre is the big one here.
Right. I'm sure the Packers would love to bring him back, right? He's a first team all-pro inside linebacker. When's the last time we could say that about the Green Bay Packers? But my understanding of kind of where his career path has gone is that he's kind of taken these prove it type of deals the past couple of years. And he now has the ammunition and the leverage to be like, look, I'm not taking a discount anymore. It's time for me to get paid. Right. And are the Packers able to do that? And do they prioritize the position enough? Look, like no one in the front office is going to say that when they signed Devondre Campbell, that he was going to be this force and this, league leader at the position, right? They thought they kind of had their stopgap guy yet again. But I'm not banking on him coming back. It'd be great if they're able to make that work. Chris Barnes could likely be your starter by default again, kind of after, losing that role. Yeah, he's an exclusive rights guy, but he's almost guaranteed to be back. And it'll be interesting to see what they do at the position. And, this will be the year to see how much the Packers actually prioritize and value that position.
Yeah, I think after they saw how the defense played and how he played in the middle, they would love to prioritize him, I'm sure. But again, we're not in normal times here where they can just re-sign everyone that they want. Speaking of which, the cornerback position, Jair Alexander extension, something that could be worked out. Kevin King, you brought up a really interesting option where if they can get him back towards a league minimum, they can actually save money in that scenario. Shannon Sullivan's unrestricted. Rasul Douglas, of course, unrestricted. A lot of guys that they have to figure out at corner.
Right. And I know Rasul, he sat in front of the media and said, I'll come back for maybe a little bit over the medium. I'm sure his agent has since advised him that that's probably not a great idea, and that he'll definitely be commanding a little bit more than the minimum, right, this on the open market.
It's the player to say, right? And then I'm sure the agent texted Brian Gutekunst as that press conference is happening, being like, yeah, you can forget what he's saying. That's
yeah, right. Yeah. So it'll be interesting, that position is sneaky that I think it's a really high priority need, right? Obviously you've got Stokes, who, really shined, as the season went on, right? And Jair's Jair. But beyond them, it's nothing. It's a void, right? There is that weird scenario because of how much they backloaded King's deal. And if they do sign him to an extension, they can actually save money with him around and him going elsewhere and being a free agent, which is crazy, but I won't completely rule that out. I think it's a humongous need for this team. And I think one of the biggest priorities for this Packers team is to get an extension done with Jair. And he's on his 5th-year option. It's north of $13 million. There's a way where they can give him basically the Jalen Ramsey contract in terms of dollars and structure, where they make him the highest paid cornerback in the league and still save like $6 to $7 million on the cap. Right. And I think that's a no-brainer to do. People are saying, oh, well, he was injured, maybe you can sign him cheaper. No, he's gonna break the bank at that position. And it makes sense to do it now and get that savings off. You can't have him at that over $13 million fully guaranteed base salary only contract sitting on your cap. You have to be able to, that's probably one of the first. I would be shocked if they don't get that deal done before the start of the league year is part of their path to get over that initial cap hill.
I totally agree. And I think it makes the most sense. He's one of your franchise core pieces. He's young, he's talented. He's arguably the best corner in football. There's just no reason not to do that. And it saves you this year. It just seems very, very much like a no brainer. Safety might be one of the ones that isn't quite as interesting, but Adrian Amos still is one that I don't know where they go with Amos. I think he's back, but that's another contract that could get really interesting.
And we're on the same page here. He's my third name. As every time I'm sitting there trying to come up with scenarios, I never know what to do with Billy Turner, Dean Lowry, and Adrian Amos. He's the third name, right? Anything wouldn't surprise me. Extend, cut, trade, restructure. All could happen. My gut says he sticks around. He's on this team. Safety is a sneaky need. They only have one safety that's under contract after the season, and it's Vernon Scott. And do they put a 5th-year option on Savage, or do they want to let him kind of play out this year? Because that option now was fully guaranteed. In the past, it used to be, every first-round pick would get the 5th-year option. They're like, yeah, and then you could just rescind it at any time with zero consequence as a team. Not anymore. You exercise that option, it is fully guaranteed. And so those decisions now are around 50%-ish in the, across the league. And I think that's what we're going to see with this team. I think Gary's going to get the 5th-year option for sure. What do they do with Savage? My gut is leaning no. And then, what do you do at that position? So, and there's a lot, we haven't even gotten to this. There's a lot of guys, there's a lot of household names that we've been talking about who 2022 is their last year under contract. And, I think we're going to go through the free agents here in a second. There's 23 free agents this year. depending on who sticks around, we could be looking at another, similar number 23 next year. That's like a huge roster turnover in 2 years.
It is. It's going to go
Potentially.
very fast. And you bring up a great point there as well, in the fact that we love to talk about this upcoming season. Even you and I, as we're talking about this today, that's not exactly how Brian Gutekunst and Russ Ball can simply operate. They have to look at 23, 24, 25, et cetera, because as you mentioned, a lot of these contracts that are upcoming as well, your Rashawn Garys, as of right now, your Jair Alexanders, those type of players, maybe a Darnell Savage, if, all of a sudden all of these players have really interesting contracts that are coming up as well. So they have to look towards all of that and figure out who do they want to prioritize long-term and not just for 2022.
Right. Just, sprinkle that into this big pot that they're trying to deal with right now. Add that on, it's not like they have enough to deal with, just trying to get out of this hole this year. But yeah, as a front office, you can't just be looking at the short term. Brian Gutekunst is not a short-term thinker. Neither is Russ Ball. You have to be able to look, at least they've got detailed plans for what they want to do this year, next year, and with a general idea of what's happening in 2024 and beyond. There's so much that could change between now and then, but yeah, you have to look, and the Packers are notorious for this, drafting a guy a year before you need him, right? You look at like AJ Dillon, right? A big part of why he was drafted was to hedge against potentially losing Aaron Jones. Well, last minute signing, Aaron Jones was able to come back, and they were both excellent last year, right? But, we also have that situation potentially in the quarterback room, but we've done that all across this roster for years. Offensive line comes to mind. How many top flight offensive linemen have the Packers allowed to walk out the door after their second contract, and they've got their cabinet stock full of quality offensive linemen ready to step up and play? I think the Packers are going to have to be ready to do that again this year and continuing into the future.
And it also goes to show what happens when you don't do that, because now I bet they would love to move on from Devontae Adams and not make him the highest paid wide receiver in football. If MVS was like the next guy in that line of people, players or whatever, then they pay the 26-year-old or whatever he is rather than the 30-year-old and go in that direction.
Absolutely.
They're just not at that position. We're like at that point where they have the next guy ready to step up, and certainly nobody that's under contract currently, because as we mentioned, just Amari Rodgers and Juwan Winfrey basically at this point. All right, we have to wrap up the positions with at least talking about Mason Crosby, because I know that's a fan favorite, but that's going to be another one where I don't see him playing at the 4.7 million that he's set to play at right now.
Right. It's another one of my kind of locks, if you will, for not being on the roster, whether it's him being cut or some ceremonial retirement, right? For me, it seems like the Packers have had a plan all along with this one. If maybe there was some conversation going on into the season where maybe Crosby knew this would be his last year. It just seems very odd that the Packers would keep a kicker on their practice squad all year and use practice squad protections on him all year to ensure that another team couldn't poach him and take him. It just seemed like they've got their eyes and kind of set on a plan for the future. So that would be a big shock if we did see Mason Crosby kick again. I love Mason Crosby, but it just, and there isn't a humongous amount of cap savings in the grand scheme of things, but, there's going to be a lot of these smaller type of moves and these tougher decisions that are going to have to all stack up on top of each other to get them over the hurdle, to be able to, bring back guys who are going to be part of this team, 2-3 years down the road. And, a guy like Mason Crosby doesn't seem like he fits into that plan.
I agree as well. We're once again in lockstep there. We kind of went through the unrestricted free agents as we kind of went position by position, but any other unrestricted free agent that you want to kind of go over that, that whose contract could be interesting or you think they might prioritize?
The one, as we kind of just talked about the group, is special teams with Corey Bojorquez.
Yeah, good call.
Do they want to bring him back? It'll be a few $1 million, or do they want to go on the cheap end, signing some, rookie undrafted free agent to come in the camp? I don't know. It almost seems like a luxury type of pick. And again, it's so weird and foreign to be able to talk about, just signing a punter to a $2 million, $3 million deal, and that being like an area of concern. I don't know if they can do it, especially if they've got these other areas, but that's a name that like I hear everyone saying, yeah, it'd be really nice to bring him back, but at the same time, they could get maybe someone who's like 90 or 80% of what he was able to do this year for 10 or 20% of the price.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's all those decisions, like you said, it's going to be little incremental ones that stack up, and just to kind of get what they need to get done. And especially if they go with Rodgers and Adams and things like that, that makes every one of those little penny pinching moves that much more important. I want to sort of wrap things up here, but I want to go quickly. The exclusive rights free agents, I think that one's super easy. Like those are basically team options, right? Like those are very close to minimum deals where if you want them back, they basically just get done, and that's sort of it.
Yeah, these are the guys that have fewer than 3 accrued seasons, and that's being on the playing on the team or being on the roster or injured reserve for 6 games out of the year. The Packers have the exclusive rights to negotiate a contract with the player at basically the team's discretion. So if they say we're going to tender you exclusive rights, they could fill in whatever number they want, but they're going to fill in the smallest amount because they can't negotiate with any other team, right? So all these guys are going to come back. The one that tops the charts is Yosh Nijman at $965,000. But again, with that top 51 rule, he would, if the cheapest guy is $700,000, that's only another $200,000 to bring a guy like him back, right? I think they've got 8 guys right now. Chances are they bring back at least 6, if not all 8. And they land on the roster, and then, they have a chance to compete in the training camp, or if someone else comes along in the draft or along their path that, falls off, and it won't be huge.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. And for some reason, you're right. Yash is exclusive rights. For some reason, I had him down as restricted. So that makes that one a lot easier. If he was restricted, that would make that a much more intriguing endeavor. That makes the only restricted then Allen Lazard, correct?
Right. And, for him to come back, again, normally these decisions would be so easy, but to bring him back in my opinion, to guarantee that Allen Lazard is a Green Bay Packer next year, they would need to levy the 2nd round tender on him, which would just be just shy of $4 million, like 3.98 and change, right? What that means is he could then go and negotiate a contract with any other team. They could sign him to a deal. The Packers could match. If the Packers decide, we don't want to match, that team would have to give the Packers a 2nd round pick. Typically 2nd round tenders are pretty lockstep that they're going to be coming back. You don't get a lot of offer sheets signed on those. Now they could go a tier lower and do the right of first refusal, meaning it's, I don't have the math from, I think it's like $2 million and change, where again, same type of scenario where another team can negotiate, but if the Packers decide not to match, they get nothing, right? I think he would be at risk at that right of first refusal because, he is such a contributor. He is such a weapon and a versatile chess piece that you could be used, across many different offenses. I think he's best suited for what the Green Bay Packers do. And I think that they value him. But again, that's a, almost $4 million addition. And they can't really negotiate that number down until, in a meaningful way, so that it becomes, not as big of an anchor, obviously, as like the franchise tag, but it's definitely, the Packers are looking to subtract. It's hard to subtract when you're adding big chunks on top of that, right? That you then have to dig out on top of. So,
no. And I think the thing too, right, is like in a vacuum, like a little under 4 million for Allen Lazard. It's like, yeah, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. However, let's just say, where you start making decisions, right, is like, or what if it's 2.5 million for Corey Bojorquez? And what if it's around 4 million for Allen Lazard? That's about 6.5 million. Well, what's the first year contract going to cost for Rasul Douglas, or maybe even a Devondre Campbell if you backload the deal? It might be around not too much more than 6.5 million. And then you have to start doing basically the trade in your head. All right, do I want, Rasul Douglas, or Rasul Douglas and a unrestricted free agent punter and, a lesser wide receiver? Or do I want to skim at corner and have Alan Lazard and Corey Bojorquez. Like those are just, again, all these decisions that they're going to, like we talked about earlier, the Rubik's Cube of moving everything around and figuring out how to get every side green and gold to make this perfect team in the end. It's not going to be easy, and they're going to have to make all these decisions.
I like that Rubik's Cube analogy. That's great. I echo that again. I know I mentioned it before, but with Devontae Adams and the franchise tag, very similarly. Like, so let's say they franchise them, and everyone, and then trade them away, right? Oh, we're just going to tag and trade. It's obvious it's going to happen. I hear that all the time. Of course, they're going to tag and trade them, but like, again, there's an opportunity cost. If you're sitting with this $20 million anchor on your cap, who are you now allowing to get the free agency that you could potentially have negotiated a deal with, right?
Yep.
You're not signing Devondre Campbell before free agency starts. You're not, but before they could, trade away that tag. You're not signing a Rasul Douglas. You're not maybe not bringing back an MVS. Like some of these guys that we think of as, high priority free agents or top targets, that if you're making the decision to franchise tag Adams, like, the opportunity cost of making that decision for all these other guys on the roster, to my mind, is humongous. And it's what, where do the Packers prioritize that, right? Is franchising Adams to keep him or to trade him to get picks and assets worth the cost of allowing a significant portion of your talented roster to now be tempted by that sweet free agency money from outside suitors? Whereas if you can get that deal done before free agency, like every team wants to do, that's your best bet to keep those guys and retain them, is before they get, to that temptation, to that of these outside suitors.
Unequivocally. And just to be clear to anyone listening, this isn't meant to be like a doom and gloom thing, right? And I want to reiterate that the Packers absolutely have a plan for all of this, and they have a plan how they're going to keep this team together, especially if they're bringing Rodgers back and are going to go in that sort of all in direction again. They're going to figure it out. And as Ken mentioned at the beginning, there's ways to do just about everything. They just can't do all of it. And what we're just trying to lay out here is the different layers and complexities of like, all right, you can do this, but then like sort of something gets pulled off of in a different direction. And it's just not going to be this perfect off season where everything goes exactly the way that I'm sure we would love it to go. But there's going to be interesting, like you put it, levers that they can pull to open up more money and do some more things. And it's just going to take a lot of creativity. And it's going to take, I think the order of operations with everything might be one of the most fun things, maybe just for you and I, because we're nerding out here, but the order of operations and how they do it is going to be really intriguing as well. Before I get you out of here, I want to just simply ask you, what would your approach be? Green Bay Packers hire you tomorrow and say, you know what, Russ is out, Ken is in. What would be your ideal approach to this Packers free? We don't have to go like necessarily in like the, should Rodgers be back or not be back? And should they trade him for, like, we don't even have to go there, but just like in general, like how much would you be willing to borrow from the future? And what's like sort of the best team that Green Bay could potentially put together?
Oh man, that's tough. That's a really loaded question, because we've been mentioning it this whole time, right? There are so many different paths that this could take off. It's like a 360 circle.
Head is bouncing around.
Yeah, it's all over. So I've referenced, maybe I'll answer it this way. I've referenced kind of like my like what I call like my base plan to kind of get them there, and then they can add things on top to maybe open up more money for other free agents. So in my mind, if they bring back all their exclusive rights free agents, there's 8 of those guys, and they tender Lazard at the second round tender, which is just short of $4 million. Those are the only adds, right? I'll just get that out of the way right now. Those are the only guys that you add to this team besides the draft. Then you restructure Clark, Jones, and Bakhtiari the maximum that you can. You extend Jair and Preston, kind of how we alluded to before. You cut Za'Darius, Mason Crosby, Lewis, Randall Cobb. That gives you $3.5 million at that start of the season. $3.5 million. So that's only $3.5 million that to bring back any of these free agents that we've been talking about. Now you also have those levers I talked about with Amos, Turner, Lowry are probably your other. You can maybe squeeze another $12 million out of that. Where I add on top of that then is I do have Rodgers right now in my scenario being traded after the deadline. So that does not include an Aaron Rodgers extension where Rodgers would be traded. And then if you factor in the practice squad, the draft, everything we talked about, players number 52, 53, and that $5 million bare minimum in season savings, I've got them at $9.2 million to start the season. So basically, everything I said, trade Rodgers, cut those four guys, Smith, Crosby, Lewis, Cobb, extend Jair Preston, and restructure Clark, Jones, Bakhtiari, bring back kind of the easy, low-hanging fruit guys to bring back. That gives you $9.2 million to play with a few more options you could spread on top, to further, get money out of the banana stand, if you will. If, whether it's free agents from outside this team, guys who are on the roster that you want to stick around, whatever.
And just to
clarify, that again, that's with Rodgers traded.
And no Davante Adams, correct?
And yeah, you'll notice that there was no ad. So that's no Davante Adams, that's no MVS, that's no anybody.
No Douglas,
that's
Campbell. Yeah.
None of those guys who are unrestricted free agents or the four guys whose contracts are scheduled to void. I believe it's Tunyon, King, Sullivan, and Campbell.
Yeah.
So it's that's my baseline. So that's, this whole time when I'm like, finding another 20 million for a franchise tag in there, it's tough. It's really tough.
Is. It's going to be an incredible month and a half, and obviously even beyond that, but I can't wait to see what happens. I think this did a really great job of, again, maybe just allowing us to nerd out and discuss this in greater detail. I hope people appreciated it. I know I did. Ken, thank you so much for doing this. I know this probably went a little bit longer than maybe we were expecting, but I think we got to just about anything. Any parting thoughts before I let you get out of here and let you get back to your abacus and spreadsheets?
Yeah, sure. I can only imagine what people think that I do on my my time off here, just sitting there crunching the numbers. Now, I've always said that, in my opinion, that like math and, salary cap, like, oh, you must be really good at math. I'm like, no, if you can add, subtract, multiply, and divide with a calculator. For me, like, I'm a business guy. That's what I do in my day job. To me, this is fun for me because it marries my love of the Green Bay Packers and my understanding of business. And to me, I'm an accountant too. So like using numbers to represent business for me, it's just like, it allows me to be what I think to be like a more informed fan, a better fan. It's kind of like my weird niche, but I'm excited to see where this goes, to see not only the future of, Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams, but everyone on the roster and what this roster is going to look like this season and how they set themselves up for beyond. This could be a huge pivoting point for the franchise. And it's going to be an exciting, month or so.
It's going to be a heck of a journey. I can't wait to see what happens. Hopefully maybe we can touch base again when it's all said and done and kind of pick up the remains of everything that happened and try to put the pieces back together. But Ken, thank you so much for joining me. You can again follow Ken on Twitter at Ken Ingalls. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining me. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.